Okay, so imagine this. It's 2 a.m., you're fast asleep, and your neighbor's kitchen is on fire. No big deal, right? You've got fire brigades, smoke detectors, WhatsApp groups. Someone's already called it in. Now imagine none of that exists. No fire brigade, no phone, no running water, and every single building on your street, your entire neighborhood, is basically made of dry wood and hay. That's London, September 1666. In just 4 days, a city of 500,000 people watched their entire world burn to the ground. 13,000 homes, 87 churches, the cathedral, the financial district, gone. And it all started with a bakery. I kid you not. Before we get into the fire itself, we need to understand what London actually looked like in 1666. Because this is not the London you know today. Think of it like this. If modern London is a well-organized city with zoning laws, building codes, and planning permission, 1666 London was the opposite. It was basically a city with no rules. It grew wherever it wanted, however it wanted. The streets were so narrow you could almost shake hands with your neighbor across the road from your upstairs window. Houses were built on top of each other, leaning outward, getting wider the higher up you went. Some streets barely saw sunlight because the buildings above blocked it out completely. Everything, and I mean everything, was made of wood and thatch. There was no concrete, no steel framing, just timber and straw packed tightly together across miles and miles of city. And it gets worse. London in 1666 was also coming off the back of the Great Plague. Just the year before, 1665, roughly 100,000 people died. That's like losing the entire population of a major city in 12 months. The city was already bruised, already barely recovering. So when the fire came, it came for a city that was already on its knees. Okay, so, Pudding Lane. Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. Around 1 a.m. Thomas Farriner, the king's baker, had not properly put out his oven before going to bed. Now look, we've all had a moment where we've left the cooker on and panicked at 2 a.m., but Thomas's mistake had consequences that are truly unmatched in history. Embers from the oven caught on a pile of fuel nearby, and within minutes, the bakery was alight. The fire spread to the next building, then the next. And here's the thing, the summer of 1666 had been one of the driest on record. Think of the city as a giant tinderbox that had been baking in the sun for months. It was basically just waiting for a spark. Thomas and his family just about escaped through a window. One servant reportedly refused to jump and died, making her one of the very few confirmed fatalities of the fire, which is actually astonishing when you realize the scale of what was about to happen. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. The Lord Mayor of London, a man called Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was woken up to be told about the fire. And his response, and I quote, he reportedly said it wasn't serious enough to worry about and went back to bed. Big mistake. Massive. Think of the fire like a viral post that nobody could stop. Once it had a bit of momentum and the right conditions, wind, dry timber, no organized response, it just spread exponentially. There was a strong east wind blowing that night, pushing the fire westward through the city. And remember those narrow streets we talked about? They acted like tunnels, channeling the wind and turbocharging the flames. Sparks leapt across rooftops. Buildings that weren't even touching caught fire just from the heat radiating across the street. By dawn, hundreds of houses were already gone. By Monday afternoon, the fire had reached the Thames waterfront, warehouses full of oil, coal, tallow, and timber. Basically, the Amazon fulfillment center of 1666, except everything inside it was highly flammable. The river itself appeared to be on fire. Samuel Pepys, a government official who kept one of history's most famous diaries, watched from across the river and wrote about seeing a most horrid, malicious, bloody flame. He then apparently went home and buried his wine and Parmesan cheese in his garden to protect them. Priorities. Pepys also went to King Charles II and essentially told him, "Your city is burning and the Lord Mayor is useless." The king stepped in personally, riding through the streets, directing efforts, reportedly handing out money to firefighters. Not exactly what we'd expect from a 17th century monarch, but desperate times. The problem was that the main firefighting strategy of the time was demolishing houses in the fire's path to create a gap, a fire break, that the flames couldn't cross. But every time they tried, the wind shifted or the gap wasn't wide enough. The fire just jumped it anyway. Tuesday, September 4th. This is the night everything peaked. Witnesses standing on the south bank of the Thames described looking across the river and seeing not individual fires, but one single continuous wall of flame stretching across the entire London skyline, miles wide. The heat was so intense you couldn't stand near the riverbank. And right at the center of that inferno, Old St. Paul's Cathedral, one of the most iconic buildings in England. People had actually taken refuge inside it, believing the thick stone walls would protect them and their belongings. They were wrong. The roof was lined with lead. When the heat became intense enough, the lead melted and poured down the streets like lava. Eyewitnesses described it flowing in rivers down Ludgate Hill. The booksellers who had stored their stock in the cathedral vaults, thinking it was fireproof, lost everything. One writer estimated the book losses alone were worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Meanwhile, the Tower of London, just to the east, came terrifyingly close to being destroyed. It housed gunpowder, enormous quantities of it. If the fire had reached it, we might be talking about an explosion that leveled everything for half a mile. The fact that it didn't is honestly one of history's near misses. By this point, refugees were flooding out of the city in every direction. Roads were gridlocked. Think rush hour, but everyone is carrying their entire life on their back, and their city is literally on fire behind them. So, what finally stopped it? Two things. First, the wind dropped. That east wind that had been pushing the fire through the city for days finally died down. Without that momentum, the fire lost its power to jump gaps and spread laterally. Second, the king's brother, the Duke of York, organized a more aggressive and coordinated demolition effort. Instead of pulling down individual houses, they used gunpowder to blow up entire rows of buildings, creating fire breaks wide enough that even the most determined flames couldn't cross. By Thursday, September 6th, the fire was mostly out. What was left of London was unrecognizable. Around 373 acres of the city, roughly the size of Hyde Park, had been reduced to ash and rubble. Remarkably, and this is a stat that genuinely surprises most people, the official confirmed death toll was only 6 people. But historians today widely believe this number is far too low. The poor who lived in the worst affected areas were often not counted. Their deaths weren't recorded. The real number is likely much higher. Here's the thing about the Great Fire. As catastrophic as it was, it also forced London into its biggest makeover in centuries. Think of it like this. You know how sometimes a hard drive completely fails and you have to rebuild your whole system from scratch? That's essentially what happened to London. Painful in the short term, transformative in the long run. The rebuilding was governed by the Rebuilding Act of 1667, basically London's first real building code. New rules said buildings had to be made of brick and stone, not timber. Streets had to be wider. Specific zones were designated for specific trades. You couldn't just build wherever you felt like it anymore. And the most iconic part of the rebuild? Christopher Wren. This architect, already brilliant, already famous, was handed the commission of a lifetime. He designed the new St. Paul's Cathedral, which still stands today. He also designed 51 other churches across the city. You can still visit them. You can stand exactly where people stood in 1666 and look up at buildings that rose directly from the ashes of the fire. London went from a chaotic, overcrowded medieval city to something approaching a planned modern urban space. In under a decade, it's arguably the most rapid and consequential urban transformation in British history. The fire didn't just destroy London. In a very real sense, it created the London we know today. What gets me every time I research moments like this is just how fragile it all was. One baker's oven, one dismissive Lord Mayor, a few days of dry east wind, and the entire course of a city's history changed forever. The people who lived through this didn't know they were living through history. They were just trying to save their homes, their businesses, their families. And yet what they experienced, and what rose from those ashes, shaped a city that half the world still visits, studies, and talks about today. These AI reconstructions are my attempt to close that gap a little, to take the dry dates and facts we learned in school and turn them into something you can actually see, actually feel. If you want to see where it all started, Pudding Lane still exists. You can stand there today. There's a monument not far away, exactly 202 feet tall, which is exactly the distance from the monument to where the fire broke out in the bakery. That's how precise they were about it. History is closer than we think. It's in the streets we walk, the buildings we pass, the cities we live in. If you enjoyed this one, I have more to share with you in the coming days. Make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe to this channel, click on the like button, and share with your friends. I will also like to know where you are watching me from. Kindly write that in the comment section. If there's another moment in history you'd like me to bring back to life, let me know in the comments. Until next time, see you soon.